Olivia Hayes sat on a cold metal bench at the bus stop, rubbing her frozen hands. It had been a bad evening. Her day had started with a tense meeting with investors, continued with a ruined lunch with partners, and ended even worse when her expensive car refused to start, her phone died, and her wallet had apparently been left in the restaurant. She sighed heavily, looking around the empty street. This was not the kind of neighborhood she was used to. There were no fancy boutiques, posh cafes, or five-star hotels. It was just a working-class neighborhood with small shops, bright neon signs, and the occasional passer-by. Everything around her seemed foreign, even the air smelled different, a mixture of asphalt, exhaust fumes, and street food. Olivia couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that one of the most influential businesswomen in the city would find herself in such a situation? She was used to having everything under control, having drivers, assistants, people who would solve any problems. But today she was alone. A cold wind blew, making her shiver. Her thin coat was more for style than for protection from the cold. She was about to get up and walk, hoping to find at least a payphone or a 24-hour cafe, when she heard footsteps. A young man sat down next to her, looking tired. He was wearing a simple work jacket with a Carter electric patch on it, his hands were calloused from working hard, and his face showed the weariness of a long day. He sat down, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes, as if he was finally allowing himself to rest. Olivia felt him look at her for a moment before he closed his eyes again. "It's going to rain," he muttered, not expecting an answer. She frowned slightly. She wasn't used to casual conversations with strangers. In her world, communication was strictly businesslike, every word thought out and considered. But perhaps she was not in her world now. "I hope the bus arrives before it starts," she replied, surprised at herself for speaking. The man grinned and opened his eyes. "This is the first time I've seen you here," he said, looking at her with a searching gaze. "You're definitely not a local." Olivia felt something stir inside her. He didn't know who she was. He just noticed that she didn't fit in with the neighborhood. "The car broke down," she said briefly. "I see." He nodded. "You look as if you are here against your will." She chuckled. "Good observation." "That's just my job." He shrugged. They fell silent. The bus still hadn't arrived, and the wind was getting colder. Olivia shivered, rubbing her hands again. The man noticed this and, without saying a word, unbuttoned his jacket, took a bill out of his inside pocket, and handed it to her. "Take it," he said calmly. She froze, looking at the money. "What? You don't have any cash, do you?" he said. "And without money, you won't be allowed on the bus." Olivia looked at him, not knowing what to say. He was a simple worker. He was obviously tired after a long day. And yet, despite this, he simply gave her his last money, not knowing who she was and what kind of person was sitting in front of him. "I can't accept," she began, but he interrupted her. "Take it," he said more firmly. "You need it more today." She felt something warm spread inside her. She was used to people helping only if it was profitable for them. They gave gifts if they expected a favor in return. They gave compliments if they wanted to get a contract. In her world, nothing was selfless. But this man, without even knowing her name, simply helped her. She took the money, whispering barely audibly, "Thank you." The man nodded and leaned back again. "My pleasure." At that moment a bus pulled up. Olivia stood up, giving him one last look. "What is your name?" He looked at her, slightly surprised by the question. "Aiden," he said. She remembered this name. And before she took a step towards the bus door, she replied, "Olivia." The bus moved off, and she still felt the warmth of the bill in her hand. She didn't know that this meeting would change everything. The next morning, Olivia sat in her luxurious office on the top floor of a glass skyscraper. But her thoughts were far beyond the building. She clutched the very bill Aiden had given her, and her thoughts returned to that evening again. He gave her the money without even knowing who she was. Just like that, without any expectations or ulterior motives. It was so unusual that Olivia couldn't stop thinking about it. Miss Hayes? Her assistant Lauren's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Olivia quickly hid the bill in the drawer and looked up. Yes? You asked for a list of the tech staff, Lauren said, placing a folder in front of her. Olivia frowned. She had indeed asked for this list yesterday, but she had done it more on autopilot than she had fully realized why. Thank you, Lauren, she replied, pretending to be fully focused on her work. When the door closed, she opened the folder and began to quickly scan the list of names. And soon her gaze stopped. Aiden Carter. Olivia felt something inside her flutter. He works for her company. This discovery shocked her. He was not just a random passerby, he was one of her employees. She didn't even know how to feel about it. She leaned back in her chair, clasping her fingers together. Now she wanted to know more about him. Underscore 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 underscore. A few hours later she went down to the technical department. It was a place she rarely visited. Unlike the plush executive offices, it was simpler: long rows of desks, racks of tools, monitors where employees analyzed data and monitored the company's equipment. Olivia tried to keep a low profile. She didn't want anyone to notice her right away, but it was hard to avoid. When the CEO of her own company goes down to the tech department, it inevitably attracts attention. Her gaze darted around the room until she saw him. Aiden was standing at one of the panels, studying a diagram. He was focused, his brows slightly furrowed, his fingers running across the screen of his tablet. Olivia couldn't help but smile. He looked the same as he had that night at the bus stop, but now there was a confidence in his eyes, a certainty that he knew his business. She came closer. Mr. Carter? Aiden looked up, surprise evident on his face. Yes? He clearly didn't expect to see Olivia Hayes, his boss, standing in front of him. I wanted to thank you for last night, she said. Aiden blinked, clearly not understanding what she was talking about. Excuse me, what? She chuckled. Bus stop. He froze, and then realization flashed in his eyes. Wait. Was it you? Olivia nodded slightly. Aiden looked stunned. Wait. But how? What? She shrugged. A difficult evening. A dead phone. A lost wallet. You helped me without even knowing who I was. Aiden still couldn't come to his senses. Damn it, he muttered. Olivia laughed quietly. Sorry it was so unexpected, but I wanted to thank you. Aiden ran his hand through his hair. I don't even know what to say. Start by letting me buy you some coffee, she suggested. He looked at her with slight suspicion. Seriously? Certainly. Aiden thought for a moment, then nodded. Well, if the boss invites you, it's hard to refuse. Olivia smiled. She knew this was just the beginning. Olivia sat at a small table in a cozy coffee shop not far from the office. Aiden sat across from her, still a little awkwardly, clutching a paper cup of cappuccino. He still didn't quite understand how it was that his boss, a billionaire and CEO of a huge corporation, was sitting in front of him and having a normal, casual conversation. Still can't believe it, huh? Olivia smiled, taking a sip of coffee. Aiden shook his head. Honestly? Yes. This is the weirdest work week of my life. She laughed. In a good or bad way? He thought for a moment, and then smiled too. I haven't decided yet. There was a short pause. And anyway, Aiden began, looking at her with a squint. If you're a billionaire, why do you even take the bus? Olivia chuckled. Not of my own free will, believe me. Just a coincidence. So you have bad days too? Of course. She nodded. Money doesn't protect you from accidental troubles. Aiden snorted. Well, at least they protect you from having to worry about things like missing a bus or spending your last money on it. Olivia looked down. You are right. He was a little surprised that she didn't argue. But you know, she continued, stirring the foam in her coffee a little with a spoon, I don't often meet people who help others just like that. Aiden shrugged. I don't know, I think it's just normal. If you can help, help. Olivia looked at him carefully. That's exactly why I invited you here. To find out if I'm always such a good Samaritan? He chuckled. To understand why. Aiden thought for a second, then chuckled. Well, probably because I know what it's like to be in a situation where no one helps. Olivia tilted her head slightly. Tell me? He hesitated for a moment, but finally spoke. When I was a teenager, my parents lost their jobs and then their home. We literally lived in a car for several months until my father found a new job. She listened without interrupting. There were days when we ate once a day. That's when I realized that one good deed could change someone's life. Someone gave us something to eat, someone let us spend the night. These little things saved us. Olivia felt something inside her shift. Since then, I just can't pass by, Aiden continued. Especially if I see that the person really needs help. She nodded but said nothing. Aiden looked at her and suddenly thought about it. Why is this so important to you? Olivia looked at him and smiled. Because I'm used to a completely different world. Aiden raised an eyebrow. To another? She took a sip of coffee and put the glass on the table. In my circle, most people do things only for the sake of profit. They smile when they want to get a contract. They give compliments when they want something from me. Even help always has some hidden motive. Aiden nodded, beginning to understand. I just gave you money for the bus. Exactly. She nodded. Without any expectations, without any hidden meaning. He chuckled. Well, to be honest, I just thought that you can't leave a girl alone at night in an unfamiliar area. Olivia smiled. In any case, you have become a real revelation for me. Aiden sighed and leaned back in his chair. I feel like this was my best investment move. They both laughed. This conversation changed them both. Aiden felt for the first time that he could communicate with a rich person on an equal footing, and Olivia realized that there were still people in the world for whom sincerity was more important than money. But none of them knew that this was only the beginning. After their conversation in the coffee shop, Olivia thought more and more about Aiden. He was different from the people she was used to seeing around her. He didn't try to impress, he didn't flatter, he didn't care about her status. He was just himself, sincere, straightforward, with strong convictions. And that's what made him so special. In the days that followed, she found more and more excuses to go down to the technical department, supposedly checking the condition of the building's infrastructure. Of course, no one questioned her after all, she was the CEO, and if she wanted to personally make sure that everything was working properly, no one dared to contradict her. But in reality, it wasn't the work that attracted her, but the conversations with Aiden. They talked about everything: life, childhood, dreams, things that inspired them. Olivia admired his determination and resilience more and more. He didn't complain about his fate, didn't envy the rich, didn't strive for easy money. He just did his job and was proud of what he had achieved. But the more she became attached to him, the more her anxiety grew. Olivia knew she couldn't hide the truth forever. Aiden was too honest a man to calmly accept the fact that she knew who he was from the beginning but didn't tell him. And then, one morning, when she went down to the technical department again, she realized that she couldn't hide it for long. Aiden was standing at the control panel, looking through reports, when he noticed her. Good morning, Miss Hayes, he chuckled. Olivia, she corrected automatically. Aiden nodded, but there was a wary look in his eyes. You've started dropping by our department too often. Is it time to worry? She smiled, but there was no lightness in her eyes. Can we talk? He immediately realized that something was wrong. Certainly. They went out onto the roof of the building, where it was quiet and the wind pleasantly cooled the air. What happened? Aiden asked, crossing his arms. Olivia looked at him, at his confident posture, at his honest eyes, and felt something inside her tighten. I have to confess one thing. Aiden frowned. Okay. Now I'm definitely interested. She took a deep breath. That evening when we met, I already knew who you were. Aiden froze. What? I found your name on the employee list the next day. I immediately realized that you worked for my company, but I was embarrassed to say it. Aiden shook his head slowly. Wait. So you knew all this time? Yes, she admitted quietly. His face darkened. So, you were just playing with me? No! Olivia grabbed his hand, but he pulled it away. I never tried to manipulate you. Aiden clenched his fists. Then why? Why didn't you say so right away? Because I was afraid that you would change your attitude towards me. He chuckled, but there was no joy in his voice. True. And now I will definitely change. Olivia felt her heart squeeze with pain. Aiden, I didn't mean to deceive you. But you did, he said firmly. You were just watching me, studying me, like I was some kind of experiment. That's not true, she exclaimed. Then what? His voice became harsher. What did you want to prove? That a rich woman can be friends with an ordinary working man? Or maybe you were just having fun? Her eyes filled with tears. No. Aiden was silent for a long time, and then smiled bitterly. I can't believe I believed you. He turned around and walked towards the exit. Aiden! She shouted. But he didn't even turn around. And at that moment she realized she had lost him. Several weeks passed, but Olivia couldn't get Aiden out of her head. Meetings, negotiations, conferences, everything lost its meaning. She could easily conclude multimillion-dollar deals, negotiate with influential people, but she didn't know how to regain the trust of one person. Aiden avoided her completely. He didn't respond to her texts, didn't pick up the phone, and at work he acted like she didn't exist. Olivia had seen him a few times in the hallways, but he just nodded, cold and distant. It was worse than if he just yelled at her. She tried to convince herself that he had a right to be angry. After all, she had deceived him, even if not out of malice. But the worst thing is that she realized that she needed him. Not as a coworker. Not as a friend. But as someone without whom her world seemed empty. But now Aiden had put a wall between them, and she didn't know how to break it down. Underscore 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 underscore. One evening, Olivia stayed late at the office, her gaze constantly returning to the email open on her laptop. She had been writing it for several days, but each time she erased it, rewrote it, changed the words. Finally, she exhaled and hit send. The message was short. You're right. I lied to you. But it was never a game. Give me a chance to explain. There was no answer after an hour or two. She had almost given up hope when the phone finally vibrated. Come to the workshop in the warehouse. If you really have something to say it to my face. Underscore 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 underscore. Olivia arrived at the warehouse where her company's parts were stored. Aiden had worked there since the beginning, but she had never set foot in his workshop before. She walked inside and saw him immediately. Aiden stood at his desk, his hands covered in oil, his shirt rolled up to his elbows. He didn't even look at her. Speak, he said in an even voice. Olivia swallowed. Aiden, I'm sorry. He gave a short laugh. This is all? No. She shook her head. You are important to me. Aiden's head snapped up. Oh, now I'm important to you. After you hid who you are? I was afraid that you would only see my status in me, she admitted. Maybe it's not about status? Maybe it's because you didn't trust me from the start? She fell silent. Aiden put his tools down and looked at her carefully. You are rich, and I am an ordinary worker. But I have never treated you differently. And you thought from the very beginning that I would turn away as soon as I learned the truth. I was wrong. Yes, I was wrong, he said firmly. She looked at him pleadingly. Let me prove that I'm not like that. Aiden was silent for a long moment. Then he wiped his hands, took a deep breath, and looked at her. One chance, Olivia. Just one. She nodded, feeling a sense of relief in her soul. I won't let you down. And at that moment she realized, sometimes a second chance means more than a first impression.